Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Thank you for joining us. This is the fourth and final panel of this year's annual South China Sea Conference. Today, we're going to do something a little unusual for this conference. We're only going to feature American speakers, and that is because we've never had a chance to hold this conference less than a month out from a U.S. election before. And so I think it behooves us to discuss a little bit now why the South China Sea matters for U.S. foreign policy and U.S. policy in Asia writ large. And to do that, we've brought in two great speakers who I will introduce in just a moment. First, a little housekeeping. Like the entire South China Sea series so far this year, this event is made possible by support from the embassies of Japan and New Zealand and Washington, as well as the Foundation for East Sea Studies at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. Everything that's said today will be on the record. We will be recording this and then get it up on csis.org and YouTube, I assume first thing next week. If you have any questions, because we are doing this as a Zoom webinar, you can type them into the Q&A function, either while our panelists are still presenting or afterwards when we move into the formal Q&A. And we'll try to get through as many as we can. I would ask everybody in the audience, if you do ask a question, please identify yourselves in the Q&A so that the speakers know who they're defending themselves against. And with that, why don't I go ahead and introduce our great speakers and then get out of the way. So first, we're going to hear from my colleague, Bonnie Glaser. Bonnie, as I'm sure everybody logging on is going to know, is the Senior Advisor for Asia and Director of the China Power Project at CSIS. Bonnie's been at CSIS since 2003. She is one of the foremost experts on China and U.S. security interests in the region in Washington, and I really look forward to her remarks. And then we'll hear from Elbridge Colby. Bridge is co-founder and principal at the Maritime Group. Before that, he was the director of the International Security Program, or I'm sorry, the Defense Program at the Center for New American Security. And he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development at the Pentagon from 2017 to 2018. And so with that, why don't I get out of the way and throw it to Bonnie to kick off our discussion this morning. Bonnie, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for having me, Greg. This has been a terrific series of discussions that you have had online, and I'm delighted to participate in the one that's going to discuss the challenges for the next administration, regardless, of course, whether it is a second Trump administration or a Joe Biden administration. So I'll start by saying something about China's strategy. I think that China is pursuing a strategy that is aimed at achieving effective control of the waters and the airspace in the South China Sea. Controlling the South China Sea is integral to China's larger objective of regional dominance. Moreover, China seeks to persuade the other claimants that they have no alternatives other than to accommodate to Chinese interests. And that is something that they are working on, I think, quite assiduously. In the near term, Beijing wants to compel countries to engage in joint development of energy with Chinese companies. That's something that they hope to do as soon as possible. But over the longer run, China seeks to limit US presence and access, and it may harbor ambitions to eventually control most, if not all, of the land features and the water in the South China Sea. After all, China does assert sovereignty over all of those land features and has not accepted the ruling from July 2016 from the arbitral tribunal regarding what kind of zone they can claim either as territorial seas around features that are submerged or possibly even 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zones. In the past 5 years, China has made incremental gains toward these goals. We know it's established a military footprint in the Spratlys, expanded its military presence in the Paracels, It's conducting frequent harassment, which Greg, you've really displayed very effectively on AMTI. And the harassment has been not just against countries seeking to conduct energy exploitation activities unilaterally, but also against companies that are doing energy exploration in the area. China's Coast Guard and military militia, of course, routinely interfere with the vessels of other nations. And the PLA tries to intimidate foreign vessels and aircraft operating in the South China Sea. So regardless of who is elected president in November, the South China Sea will remain crucial to American interests in the region. Were China to become the predominant power in the area, it would have the capability, potentially, to put a chokehold on one of the world's most important trade routes. And according to work by my China Power team, we really tried to quantify that, and we came up with the number of $3.4 million in trade annually passing through the waters of the South China Sea. We'll need to update that. We'll see if the numbers have changed. So China's 7 bases in the Spratlys, its upgraded facilities, and the Paracels greatly extend the reach of its anti-access force and its power projection capabilities. And this certainly presents a challenge to the United States. Moreover, the US has long sought to prevent any rival power from dominating East Asia. And thus, US standing in the region is largely dependent on its ability to uphold international law, including freedom of navigation and peaceful resolution of disputes. Permitting Chinese control over the South China Sea, I think would be a strategic setback for the United States, and it might embolden China to attempt to revise the status quo elsewhere, such as the East China Sea or even the Taiwan Strait. Finally, I think the overall geopolitical stakes are really significant. US policy toward the maritime disputes in the South China Sea will affect whether regional players will choose to balance against Beijing, to work with outside powers, such as the United States and Japan and Australia and India, or to bandwagon with China. So the Trump administration's record is mixed on the South China Sea, but on balance, I think there have been some important achievements, and I'll just run through some of those quickly. More effective FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations, have definitely taken place under this administration. They have been conducted regularly, irrespective of other developments. Clear challenges to excessive maritime claims around former submerged reefs, such as Mischief Reef, have taken place frequently. And this is an improvement, frankly, over the Obama administration. Second, the US has finally aligned its policy with the July 2016 ruling. And we know that on the 4th anniversary this year of that ruling, the US declared that the 9-dash line that China has, of course, drawn and its historic rights claims are at variance with international law. They are illegal. Thirdly, multilateralization of the South China Sea. We have seen more like-minded countries following the United States in more closely aligning their policies with the 2016 ruling. Australia first, and then the UK, France, and Germany together presented a statement to the UN, which is probably unprecedented. The UK conducted a FONOP in the Paracels, and of course, Navy ships from Australia and Japan are exercising with the US Navy in the South China Sea. The Trump administration has frequently condemned Chinese harassment of its smaller neighbors inside their own exclusive economic zones and stood up for the rights of all countries to their resources under international law. And then finally, the US imposed economic sanctions on 24 Chinese companies. They've been put on the entities list due to what is referred to as their significant role in the construction of bases in the Spratlys. And the State Department announced they wouldn't issue visas to Chinese nationals who were in some way complicit in the reclamation, construction, or militarization of the outposts in the South China Sea. So those are significant achievements, and I think that there's much to be built on going forward. On the negative side, the Trump administration has fallen short in the area, particularly of diplomacy. It has not showed up annually at the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit at the highest level, and it has not appointed an ambassador to ASEAN. And this has resulted in persistent concerns in the region that U.S. attention to Southeast Asia is episodic. So the challenges and opportunities for the next administration are several. First, restore U.S. leadership and credibility in the region. Smaller South China Sea claimants are often reluctant to stand up to China. Their willingness to do so is obviously diminished if the United States does not have a strong and consistent position and demonstrate that the region is a priority for the United States. Secondly, we have to continue effective FONOPs, and I hope that both, whoever, again, regardless of who is elected, I hope the current practice is continued. That means keeping Indo-PACOM Command in the lead, not having the White House involved in determining the time of every one of our FONOPs. They need to be done regularly, regardless of other circumstances. We need to support American energy companies that remain interested in energy development in the South China Sea. Beijing is deliberately raising the risks of undertaking energy development in disputed waters. And China will benefit if US and other foreign companies withdraw from exploitation in the South China Sea. So the US has to continue to push back against Chinese intimidation of foreign energy companies. Several, I think, countries are really urgent to develop their oil and gas deposits, and the Philippines and Vietnam are high on that list. If these countries become overly dependent on China for their energy, either through development or supply, then that's going to have a very negative impact on US interests. Next is the Code of Conduct. So might be concluded in 2021. China has said that it would be. We have to play some role in this process. Obviously, the US isn't at the table as a negotiating partner. But Washington should consult with ASEAN members about the Code of Conduct and head off the conclusion of an agreement that is favorable to Chinese interests but harmful to the interests of ASEAN and its members, especially South China Sea claimants. And then my last recommendation is that the US should consider sanctioning Chinese companies that are conducting these harassment activities. And I know, Greg, you and Zach Cooper wrote a short piece on that, so I know we agree on this. There are survey ships that are operating scientific research vessels and fishing vessels in other countries' exclusive economic zones. So the targets of Trump administration sanctions are companies that dredged and militarized the South China Sea, and those actions cannot be and won't be undone. But by signaling a willingness to impose costs on ongoing illicit activity, the United States may be able to influence Beijing's future behavior, and it should seek to get other countries on board with future sanctions. So the rollback of China's gains is not achievable at an acceptable cost. Accommodation that accepts Chinese dominance of the South China Sea is too costly for the United States. So instead, a US strategy should seek to impose costs on China for its destabilizing behavior and prevent future Chinese actions, such as establishment of baselines in the Spratlys or an air defense identification zone. And a US strategy should definitely continue to enforce freedom of navigation, but also must continue to protect the rights of smaller countries, especially to resources. So sorry to go on for so long. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Those were great kickoff remarks. Bridge, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with the South China Sea Conference and also to be on the panel with Bonnie. And I'll just say I agreed with essentially everything Bonnie said, and I think she said it very lucidly and pointedly. So I just associate myself almost everything that she said, but with enthusiasm. So kind of building on those comments, which I think captured the key points. From the strategic level, I think Bonnie absolutely put her finger on it when she said the key issue, the key dynamic is this bandwagoning versus balancing dilemma. The only thing I might amplify in her comments there is that I think the South China Sea is so critical for the reasons she suggested as sort of a test of U.S. capability and resolve in the region, but also because of the centrality and criticality of Southeast Asia. I think Bonnie put it exactly right when she said that China's goal, and she knows China a lot better than I do, but that China's goal is regional predominance or hegemony, as the Department of Defense has indicated over the last couple of years. And critical for that is Southeast Asia. I mean, I think Southeast Asia, from the U.S. strategic perspective, or from a kind of the broader strategic perspective, is the sort of critical open field in this competition within Asia. I mean, if you look at the big players in Asia, Japan and Australia, they're aligned clearly against China. Obviously, sort of there's a certain amount of maneuvering, but it's a pretty clear alignment against Chinese dominance of the region. Obviously, Australia is along there, Taiwan as well. This leaves Southeast Asia as essentially the largest kind of market area and geographic area, given its geographic importance, for China to try to establish that dominance over the region. I mean, basically what China has to do to achieve its goal is to assemble or suborn enough states in the region, willingly or not, to be able to outweigh the combined power, for lack of a better term, I refer to as an anti-hegemonic coalition. And we can kind of see that coming into shape, whether it's through the Quad or some other mechanism or all of the above, we don't know yet. But basically that balancing coalition, China will have to outweigh, and the natural area for it to look to is Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is critical, and also because most of it is not within the traditional American defense perimeter, obviously, with the exception of the Philippines. And so there's more space, there's more room under the threshold for China to work with. And in that context, I think the South China Sea is critical. It's critical in terms of, the reasons that Bonnie put it, in terms of the transit of wealth and trade through the area. It's also significant as an indicator of U.S. credibility, given that obviously China wants to avoid a large conflict or a kind of a strong sort of separation. China wants to present each state with a tough decision that will result in that state making the decision to bandwagon rather than balance. So through a combination of inducements like the economic development that Bonnie mentioned, but also threats, implicit or explicit. And if China can demonstrate that U.S. assurances are thin or hollow, then states in the region in Southeast Asia will be more likely to bandwagon. As somebody in Hanoi said to me last year, this is obvious. It's easy to explain. It's hard to deal with, but I think it's worth reiterating because the U.S. has come around, I think, to seeing this. I also would underline, and I know Greg has written a lot on this eloquently, that the military development in the South China Sea is material. There is sometimes you get in the U.S. a sort of a dismissal of Chinese efforts, militarization in the South China Sea. I think given the work of people like Tom Shugart, it's very clear that these are militarily significant. It doesn't mean they're impregnable, but impregnability is not the relevant military standard. They certainly are intimidating to regional states, and given the distance from U.S. bases and traditional operating areas, it's also pretty significant for U.S. forces. So South China Sea is vital. Hence, that's why we're here. Now, I think certainly my perception and my sense of thinking in the administration early on and since then has been that there needed to be a sharp change, that the back in 2016, 2017 timeframe, as Bonnie put it, I think generally we were not going in the right direction. There was sort of a slow progression towards essentially effective control. I mean, I believe Admiral Harris and Admiral Davidson have said words to that effect. So we had to have a pretty sharp change, and part of that was to indicate a kind of a strong and costly signal of U.S. seriousness and resolve. And I think a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing on China, but also in the South China Sea, is this kind of costly signal that it's not just nice sort of mellifluous words, but it's stuff that's costly and risky, but demonstrates to China, but also to regional states that the Americans mean business and are in it for the long haul. And I think the administration has been progressively moving in that direction very commendably over the last couple of years. So it started out with things like the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategy. But now we moved into more concrete moves. I think the clarification of the mutual defense treaty with Manila, the strong support for Vietnam and its efforts to resist Chinese coercion and bullying. And then, of course, more recently, the condemnation of China's claims over the summer relating to the ICJ ruling. All of these show a real seriousness and a credibility. And I think Bonnie, laid them out very well. So going forward, what does this mean? I mean, my view is that China now has clearly come out. The mask is off in terms of what China's goals are and how it will be prepared to get to that point in the last year, in particular, particularly since COVID. I think we've seen obviously the wolf warrior diplomacy, the aggression on the line of actual control with India. I mean, this is not the sort of peaceful rise China anymore. So I think what this means is that hide and bide is essentially dead. Even if you had a new leadership in Beijing that tried to get back to hide and bide, I don't think any of us would be foolish enough to believe that it's a reliable shift, since China could always come back to this more aggressive approach. But I also think this means that this is sort of the end of the beginning, in terms of now we've realized that China is a fundamental challenge to the sovereignty of regional states and to fundamental U.S. interests as well. But China, of course, will adapt. And I think, even as we see decoupling, which will invariably be partial and selective, China is also adapting, obviously, and Bonnie knows a lot more about this than I do. But, there's attempts to conduct reform internally. We'll see how that goes. But I think fundamentally, and this is where it's most relevant to South China Sea, I think China's incentives to push the envelope will actually rise. Because if China is resolute in pursuing its goal of regional predominance, which I believe it is, then it can't hide and bide. It can't essentially grow its way to hegemony just, without people kind of noticing. It will need to short circuit or fracture the formation or cohesion of this anti-hegemonic coalition. And I use the term coalition, let me emphasize, kind of informally and broadly. And that means that China will have to take more aggressive steps and pointed steps to remind countries in the region of the merits of bandwagoning. And so this is another reason why I think we need to be really on edge and forward-leaning and focusing on China to make sure it doesn't think that it has an opportunity precisely to, this is to deter and avoid war and crisis rather than court it. So I think the big challenge for the next administration, if it's the Trump administration, I think it's a matter of following through. I think the administration has really commendably set the trajectory well and has been able to do the right things. I think some of the things that Bonnie mentioned in terms of areas for improvement are certainly valid. But it's more about kind of following through. I think for a Biden administration, if Vice President Biden is reelected, I think I've been encouraged by some of the rhetoric coming from the campaign in terms of competing with China, but I'm also concerned, and I think there was some interesting comments by Bill Kausikan recently, that whether there will be a willingness to follow through in this kind of sharp and costly signal side. And I think that my impression is that is a concern in Southeast Asia. And I think some of the comments about a sort of a dual track approach with China are a bit disturbing, because I think you see, for instance, some comments from the campaign and people around it that a Biden administration would compete with China, but would also find ways to cooperate on things like climate change, the pandemic, and non-proliferation, migration, food security, et cetera. Not coincidentally, many of these items are the top priority for a potential Biden administration. So, Beijing is obviously very intelligent. We'll see that, and we'll try to use that as leverage. And South China, it will be tempting for certainly parties in a Biden administration to seek to use that as trade space. And I think that's very important that not happen. I also think it'll be important for a Biden administration, if it comes to pass, to really follow through on the national defense strategy logic of focusing on Asia, particularly Taiwan, which is the front line. If Taiwan is defensible, then the South China Sea will be defensible, but it's not necessarily the other way around. And I'm also concerned about if Vice President Biden is elected, about the potential for sort of democracy and human rights issues to again come too high to the fore. I mean, I think these are always issues that Americans should speak out about. But, for instance, I believe Senators Menendez and Kaine introduced a bill to block a lot of security cooperation with country. I think it was with the Philippines, but it's more of a sort of a symptom rather than the whole story. But that, the countries that are critical that we work with and reassure and try to bolster right now are countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, et cetera, if the U.S. takes a more kind of ideological approach, this could be a real problem. I'll just close. I do think that all said, that there is, and I think Southeast Asian audiences should take heart, that this is an area of broad bipartisan agreement. The argument is mostly about how to do the thing rather than whether. And so I think Southeast Asian audiences, I hope, will see that Americans are committed to helping them preserve sort of a free and open Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific more broadly. Thanks.
Thanks, Bridge. I think it's heartening to see that there wasn't as much disagreement on the panel as some of the audience might have thought, although maybe we'll get there in the Q&A. Before I open it up, I'd like to pull us back a little bit. So I think one of the major problems across administrations when it comes to South China Sea policy, I guess it's really been twofold, right? One is it's a slow-moving crisis. And so there's a constant tendency to have to pay attention to fires in the Middle East or the Ukraine or North Korea. And what is the likelihood that there's a fundamental shift now in the South China Sea actually kind of continues to come up as inevitable crises develop in the next administration? And related to that, how does the South China Sea fit into broader Asia policy, particularly in Northeast Asia? Because if we were to gather all of the Southeast Asia hands at senior levels of U.S. government, there wouldn't be enough to play a pickup basketball game. The South China Sea has to somehow get some credibility in the Korea, China, Japan discussions. How do you do that? And whoever wants to swing first, recognizing that's a bit of an unfair question. Bridge, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think my point, and you can check because I think it's online, but that I've said to the Koreans in particular is that the Korea issue needs to be seen in a regional context, and the South China Sea is a much more significant near-term issue than anything that's going on in the peninsula. And I think Japan is the cornerstone of our kind of common position in the Asia Pacific. I would say it's the single most important U.S. ally in the world. But I think Japan clearly recognizes the importance of Southeast Asia. I think Taiwan is as I said, the front line. But I think Taiwan is kind of directly relevant to the South China Sea resolution. I think it's one that Southeast Asian states should take a very keen interest in. I'm sure they do already. But I agree with you. I mean, I think the Chinese, it's hard to make progress in Northeast Asia because Japan is obviously an extremely developed state with high capability, should be higher, but on the military side, but very high capacity. So it's open field to Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is really where we need to focus, and Taiwan.
I would just add, Greg, that the issue I think here really goes back to not separating out sort of, South China Sea as an issue that is not integral to the entire Indo-Pacific, and recognizing that, as Bridge and I agree on this point of the future pivotal issue really being balancing versus bandwagoning. There's no country in the region that wants to see China as the dominant power. And if you tell the South Koreans the South China Sea is really important to you, they think about the punishment from China that they suffered when they made the decision to deploy THAAD missile defense in their country. But if you talk to them about the broader implications of China dominating the entire region, that kind of punishment, leverage, influence over their policies is only going to increase. And so there has to be a point, I think, that countries decide to take a stand on the South China Sea because they have to connect it directly to their own interests. And I mean, frankly, South Korea has not done that. They have really stood quite a distance from this issue. I think, occasionally maybe helping, I think it was the Philippines, they supplied some vessel, maybe a law enforcement ship of some kind. I could be wrong, you can correct me, but they have not been deeply involved compared to other countries where we've seen Japan, Australia, for example, step up more. So I just think there needs to be more of a conversation about how other countries' interests connect to what's happening in the South China Sea, and this is not something that they should ignore.
Thanks, Bonnie. Well, you're right. The Koreans have gifted, I think they sold it for $1, one naval vessel to the Philippines. They actually are now the largest arms provider outside the U.S. to the Philippines, but that's mostly, because they're selling stuff that's cheaper than the U.S., but it's still compatible with everything the AFP has. So they provided the fighter jets. Hyundai is building the two biggest Navy ships in the Philippine Navy. But it hasn't been connected in a strategic way, the way that the Japanese have, right? So Korea has approached South Asia from a purely commercial standpoint when it comes to military sales. There's very little effort to try to ease the way for more sales that wouldn't happen, on strict dollar and cents. So let's get ready to open it up to the audience. And if anybody has a question, again, please type it into the Q&A function and identify yourselves. Keeping on the Philippine point, I want to start with a question that David Rosenberg raised, which is what can the U.S. do to stop the Philippine tilt toward China? And I maybe want to broaden that a little bit and ask about the role of the alliance, period, right? So the Philippines is both the oldest security alliance the U.S. has in Asia and also in most ways the weakest. How vital do you see maintenance of that alliance for U.S. interests? Can we actually have a South China Sea strategy if the alliance goes away, either before or after Duterte's term of office ends in 2022?
So I want to start generally just by saying that the weakening of any U.S. alliance in Asia is really going to embolden China. We know since the 1990s, the Chinese have called our alliances Cold War relics. For a while, I think it was just a rhetorical position because they really didn't have the capability, the diplomatic heft to really try and promote that goal, but they really have been operationalizing that over in recent years. And so really every alliance we have is important, and increasingly the partnerships are important too. So of course it's not just the alliances. In response to David Rosenberg's question, I would say that we have to do two things. The United States has to shine a spotlight on China's role in the region in the Philippines, what China is and is not doing. And you've done a lot of this on AMTI. What is China doing in Filipino waters? Harassing fishermen, preventing supplies from being delivered to Thitu. I mean, there's all sorts of negative things China's doing, but we can't stop there. It can't just be a negative conversation about China. It has to be a positive conversation about what the ties with the United States brings to the Philippines and to the region. And every country in Southeast Asia has always been focused on what the United States can bring economically. And we continue to be somewhat weak in the economic pillar of our Indo-Pacific strategy. And so I think that's a challenge for the next administration. We just have to deliver more.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Bridge. And Bridge, if I
Yeah,
can,
sure.
because of your time in the Pentagon, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of address an issue that comes up a lot in discussions with Manila, right? Which is there is an undeniable sense in the Pentagon that the Philippines doesn't provide, it's not the force multiplier that pretty much every other U.S. alliance is. It doesn't provide a whole lot of additional capacity. It no longer provides access. It doesn't fit, I think, the paradigm of what most U.S. war planners are thinking of when they think of how alliances fit into U.S. Contingencies in the region. And so, how do you sell the U.S.-Philippine alliance to a Pentagon, starting with the premise that it's not Japan or Australia or Korea?
Well, you may be talking to different people in the Pentagon, but I think the Philippines is absolutely critical. And geography physics matter a lot in military affairs, as others know better than I do. And the Philippines, the geography is absolutely essential. Certainly in Southeast Asia, but really in Asia in general. I have a somewhat different view probably than what you seem to suggest right there. But if people are interested, I testified to the House Armed Services Committee recently on this point. My view is most U.S. allies and partners should be essentially concerned about self-defense. The exception in the region being Australia, which is obviously kind of makes more sense to help defend forward. But certainly a country like the Philippines should essentially be focused on self-defense. That's the best it can do. Partners like Vietnam as well. Taiwan, basically South Korea, and to a large degree Japan, although Japan could also help in some other scenarios. But the Philippines is absolutely critical. Primarily, if nothing else, it's geography, and so both for enabling U.S. potential access, and that's something we should work on, but also denying it to China. I mean, if China had the ability to project power from the Philippines, we would be in a world of trouble. In terms of others know a lot more about the relationship with Manila than I do, but my sense is that Duterte is just wrong, which is that he seems to say, and others again know more about what he's saying, but that China can't be resisted, that it's inevitable. But that's false. I mean, we're in fact right now, if current trends continue, China's aspirations for regional dominance will be frustrated because India, Japan, the United States, Australia, and then to some degree, countries like Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea at the end of the day are kind of coming together. So, I think the question for the Philippines as a political entity beyond Duterte is, would you rather the United States be the kind of predominant power in your immediate area or China? And obviously there are ideological reasons, but also, the main concern Southeast Asian countries usually have with the United States is that we're not involved enough, whereas the main concern that countries in Southeast Asia have with China is that, they say they're a big country and you're a little country and you need to do what they say. So which future is preferable? I just think the U.S. has a fundamentally very good case. We need to get through the Duterte period or convince him that, his country's interests are better served with the United States, because I think it's pretty clearly more in the Philippines' interest for the U.S. to be the dominant power. It's an immediate area. So I think we have a good hand of cards to play from a diplomatic perspective. It's a matter of just tactically doing it. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
Thanks. Let's stay on the alliance topic. So we've got a question from Aaron Connolly at IISS, who asked about the role of Thailand here, the Thai alliance. And I guess either on South China Sea policy or kind of more broadly, U.S. competition with China in the region. Bridge, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. This is a very, very good question, and one where in general, I think that the United States should be encouraging partnerships wherever possible. But I think because of the growing power of the PLA and the PRC in general, the United States is going to need to be increasingly sort of jealously guard its credibility, and particularly what I call its kind of differentiated credibility. That is, its credibility vis-a-vis China and Asia. And Thailand, to me, is actually a tougher case than Taiwan. Taiwan, I think our credibility is on the line. The people of Taiwan are pretty resolute in not wanting to be part of the PRC. And it's militarily significant for the fate of Asia as a whole. Thailand, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure to what extent our differentiated credibility is on the line with Thailand, because the nature of the alliance is pretty ambiguous, largely I think historically in large part because of Bangkok, not necessarily forced on them by the United States. It's a difficult military problem, from being located obviously on the mainland of Asia and not that far from Chinese land power at the end of the day. And Thailand it's not clear that Thailand wants such a close relationship with the United States. So I'm very comfortable with Thailand in the kind of similar category as, say, Vietnam. I think if Thailand if we're going to have, we're in a period, and I talk a lot about this in the Taiwan context, we're in a period of where ambiguity is more and more dangerous. And I think Thailand and we are going to have to, whether quietly or openly, have to kind of figure out which direction this goes in. That doesn't mean that we push them into Beijing's camp by any stretch, but I think this is going to become more and more of an issue over time. So it's something I want to think about. I'm curious what you think, Aaron, and others.
Thanks, Bridge. I mean, I think you've highlighted one of the major issues we have to struggle with, right? Which is the Thai alliance has become a bit of historical anachronism, and we have partners, security partners, comprehensive partners, who are more likely to stand with the U.S. in a conflict than the nominal ally. And so how comfortable are we, right? How much damage does it do if we kind of put the alliance word aside and just accept that we can work with the Thais in some areas and they don't have to have that moniker of ally weighing them down all the time?
Well, sorry, Bonnie, if I could just follow up on that. I think you're exactly right. And I think that maybe that's the most comfortable, that's the most accurate reflection of the political military situation today. And Bonnie, I don't want to overinterpret what you said, but one area where I'm a little bit different perhaps is I think while it's exceptionally important to stand up for alliances we do keep, sometimes it does make sense to downshift alliances, and actually it can increase your credibility on the core alliances. That's certainly true, say, in the example of Afghanistan today. So I think, Greg, what you said is, if Thailand has a different view, then they should let us know. But I think we should be careful that people don't get the impression that our sort of differentiated credibility is on the line with respect to Thailand in the way that it is, say, with respect to the Philippines or even Taiwan.
Thanks. Bonnie, let's shift gears a little bit. So you talked about the entity list additions a few months ago, and one of the things that was really illuminating there, right, is CCCC is clearly the China construction company that dredged the islands, was the number one target on that list. CCCC dredging, or one of their subsidiaries, is building the Sangley Point Airport project in the Philippines, right next to the Philippine Navy's base on Manila Bay. And everybody in the defense establishment in the Philippines says it's a terrible idea, we should follow the Americans, and Manila still won't. And so Drake Long at Radio Free Asia, who was formerly with AMTI, asked the question, given that, if we can't even get the Philippines to back us, what do you think the likelihood is of actually building a coalition around some kind of economic sanctions on China on the South China Sea?
Well, it's always difficult to build coalitions to support sanctions. I think we've seen this across a large number of issues, and particularly with countries that have really deep economic relationships with China. And virtually all of Southeast Asia does. And I think that there might be reluctance to do so. I would say that as China puts more pressure on countries, that their positions might change. And if the United States actually takes the lead, has a coherent strategy, is seen to be a reliable partner, if maybe some of the other countries in the region, and maybe it's Japan and Australia, willing to impose some sanctions on some of these companies. I mean, you could take like a survey ship that's been operating around Malaysia or around the Vietnamese. You can identify what its owner is in China. And you can take measures against that company. And I don't think that this is just necessarily symbolic. This can have, I think, a real impact on some of these companies and their ability to do business. So it's not going to be an easy lift, but I would assume that no countries in Southeast Asia would go along with us.
Thanks. Let me stay with you for a minute. So we have a question from Hugh Slater, who asks, going back to what Bridge said about concerns about whether on climate or other issues, the next administration trying to find areas to cooperate with China. And this was a debate during the Obama administration, right? Where is the line between cooperation and competition? And I think what the question gets down to is it possible to cooperate with China on certain global equities while also increasing pressure on the South China Sea? And can cooperation on those global entities be used as leverage for the U.S.? It's not just a one-way street, right? We say that China can use the South China Sea as leverage on, I don't know, Paris. Can the U.S. do the same?
Well, I would caution against linking issues across different domains. So I don't think we should be seeking cooperation with China on one issue and somehow linking that to the South China Sea. I think that if Vice President Biden is elected, yes, climate change is going to be a priority, and China's a huge problem, and it can't be ignored. But we should not allow Beijing to use our desire for cooperation in order to give the Chinese leverage. And the Chinese are already talking about that. They're already saying that if somehow, there is a rise to the fore of issues to cooperate, whether it be on global health or climate change or North Korea, once again, that these are issues that they can use to get the United States maybe to lift our tariffs on China. I don't think that that's a path that the Biden administration is going to go down at all. I think the Chinese are going to be rather disappointed. So we should make that clear from the beginning. Yes, where our interests converge, we should work with China, but they are only going to take steps that are in their interest. They're not going to do it in order to somehow bring benefits to the United States. So, I don't know whether we can actually use this to leverage our position, but we certainly have to prevent China from using it to gain any leverage. And I would add to that we have to be careful to not allow China to bog us down in process. And it has been clear that that's been part of their strategy in the past. They talk us to death. They've done this in the economic sphere, in the JCCT and the strategic economic dialogue, and deliver the same things, promises over and over again, and don't deliver. And the United States has to be careful to not be pulled into a situation in which China can privilege process over outcomes.
Luckily, China does not do that with ASEAN in terms of the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Bridge, do you have anything you wanted to add on that point?
I mean, Bonnie nailed it. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the only thing I would say is, as she was talking, if people care so much about these issues, and I mean, obviously climate change is a significant issue that needs to be, whether it's the Paris Accords or something else, if the Chinese aren't going to play constructive ball, there's a world in which people who really care about those issues should put pressure on China. Now, I agree with Bonnie about not linking necessarily, but instead of this sort of supplicant attitude and this sort of strategic, I mean, I think this is what Bilahari Kausikan was referring to, is that sort of like, well, we're going to compete over here, but then on the issues that we really care about, we're going to not compete. It's going to be apolitical. You could say, look, like, if China doesn't play ball in a constructive way, then that's part of the competition. So in a way, you could have the progressives actually be more hot on. I mean, maybe I'm being too optimistic if that's the future, but I mean, I think I completely agree with Bonnie's take. Given the discourse among Democrats, I'm not sure that I'm quite as sanguine, but I'm optimistic in the long run. But the short one really matters, as I was kind of emphasizing earlier.
We have a couple questions, as we always do, about FONOPS. So I think I'll ask for both of your opinions. So John Grady at USNI asked whether or not we can actually maintain the current vigorous schedule of FONOPs. I presume he means as, you know, China's strength grows and whether or not we can coordinate with allies and partners. We also had a general question from John Rennie Short on what's the value of FONOPs? How would you evaluate it? I think, well, I'm certainly not dismissive of the value of FONOPs, and I've argued in the past for how important they could be. The fact that they took on such overwhelming, like symbolic significance from 2015 through at least 2017, I think it really perversely kind of hurt the U.S. in the South China Sea. Everybody fixated on what this Navy ship did around Subi Reef on this day, and kind of gave China a pass on the fact that it was stealing the South China Sea. So, Bridge, maybe you want to start off, since, you know, I'm sure you had to deal with this more closely.
Yeah, I'm kind of in your camp. I'm skeptical that they're that valuable. I mean, I think they're important every once in a while just to demonstrate that, you know, credibly that we don't accept these claims. But not only were they, effective control, they were militarizing features. They don't actually stop anything. And I think, as Bonnie rightly put it earlier, there needed to be an imposition of cost, which is, I think clarification of the NBT and the critique of the, you know, over the summer on the with respect to the ICJ ruling, that's much more significant. And things like, you know, cooperating more closely, if we could elevate our strategic partnership with Vietnam, these would be much more, or the sanctions. I'd much rather do that. The other thing is there is a cost, and I think that might be what some of the questioners were alluding to, is, you know, one of the kind of core features of the National Defense Strategy, which Secretary Esper actually, I think, pointed to the other day at CSBA, was it's about restoring our warfighting edge, and that means a downshift on presence operations that aren't plausibly connected to, you know, increasing our defense and direct deterrent against the stressing scenarios. And FONOPs fall into that category. And they are stressing for the fleet. And I mean, you've seen what happened to the Seventh Fleet. It's not obviously not only about the FONOPs, but what's happened with the Seventh Fleet. We need to actually do less in order to, you know, get our forces trained up for a high-end scenario, so that the Chinese see that if they tried that, they would be frustrated. So I think, you know, my tendency would be to kind of put a downshift on probably on frequency, not especially focused on the FONOPs per se, but just on these kind of presence operations, in the interests of you know, restoring our warfighting edge.
Bonnie?
So I don't disagree with that, but I guess, you know, Greg and I have always said, and many others have also said, FONOPs are necessary but not sufficient. So, you know, it's a global program. Obviously, this isn't just in the South China Sea. We need to defend the rights of all seagoing nations to sail anywhere in the world, or, you know, fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. You know, maybe we could, you know, there's an issue of frequency, but I would highlight that this is one of those areas that the Chinese complain about, and they complain loudly and frequently, and that probably means that it is creating a challenge for them that they feel the need to respond to, and maybe that is an indicator of the fact that we should keep doing them, that we are highlighting that they don't have a valid sovereignty claim over water space that you know, is not necessarily legal. And this is particularly important around the low tide elevations, submerged features like Mischief Reef. It's particularly important around the Paracel Islands, where the Chinese have drawn illegal straight baselines. And so I think, you know, the fact that the Chinese scream pretty loudly and tell their own population, oh, we drove the US Navy out of the area. So we must be doing something right here.
Thanks. So as with all of these events, I can already tell we're not going to get through the actual queue. So I apologize in advance. Let's try to get through a few more, though, before we hit our time. So, Bonnie, you focused in on the energy exploration problems, especially off Vietnam. And Sean Lawler from the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi asked what opportunities you think a new administration will actually have for cooperation on energy with Vietnam in the South China Sea. Maybe you can, if you want to broaden that or not, but, you know, what can we actually do in the face of this Chinese campaign?
Well, I think I'll, maybe draw you into this question, Greg. I know this is something you've followed pretty closely. Uh, uh, I have heard our, ambassador in Vietnam, Dan Crittenbrink, talk about the need to support U.S. energy companies. Is ExxonMobil going to remain involved in that blue whale the area where they may move forward with exploitation going forward? We could also talk about the Philippines, where apparently Shell is now trying to sell its share in the Malampaya field. So I'm a little concerned about foreign energy companies withdrawing, either because they don't see that what their ownership there is profitable, because they have other alternatives that are more profitable, or because they just see that there's too many security risks involved. So what do you think we should do?
I think, honestly, I think our options are more limited than we might like to admit. As you indicated, Exxon is the only American company left off the coast of Vietnam. And I expect that Exxon's probably going to pull out of Blue Whale for purely commercial reasons, right? Exxon has been selling off assets worldwide. Energy prices have dropped. There's a lot more, I think, profitable drilling that can be done without the risk of the Chinese sinking one of your boats.
Right.
When it comes to Shell pulling out of Malampaya, that's a sign that Malampaya is reaching the end of its productive life, which everybody knows. And the Philippines keeps trying to push it back and say, well, we can get 5 more years out of this. At some point, Malampaya stops producing, and it's going to stop producing pretty soon. And Reed Bank is not going to come online in time. So the best thing the U.S. can do for the Philippines is export LNG to the Philippines, because the other alternative is going to be to let China build coal-fired plants in the Philippines. In either case, I think that Manila sat on its hands for too long. By the time anything could come online from Reed Bank, there won't be a market for it anymore. It'll either be coal or LNG. Those are your 2 options. The one place that I think is still really up in the air is off Malaysia. I don't really know how much risk Petronas and Shell are going to be willing to take to continue their existing operations off Sabah and Sarawak. But Petronas is a golden goose. I mean, it pays for a significant amount of Malaysia's operating budget. They're not just going to back off if China keeps ratcheting up the pressure. So I'm a bit cynical. I think we have to get a little more creative than just thinking about how we keep companies in the South China Sea, because I think the companies are already headed out. We're almost out of time, and so let me throw in an intentionally provocative question, and one that I actually haven't had to answer myself or seen answered in one of these forums. So Yoji Koda asks about the Pratas, the stepchild of the South China Sea disputes. If China decided to take the Pratas, I mean, I guess you could even say something like blockade the Pratas, how does the U.S. respond? And this brings in Bridges' top concern, right, which is Taiwan. Bridge, do you want to start?
I actually have not given this a lot of thought, so I would have to look into it a little bit more. My South China Sea detailed understanding of the map is a little. This is. Can you give me a little more context, Craig?
Yeah. So the Pratas would be the reef that Taiwan has occupied since 49, I guess, off the south coast of China, right? And there nobody else claims it. So this is a purely China-Taiwan dispute. Just recently, we had the Taiwanese defense minister talk about Chinese incursions into the Taiwanese ADIZ, and one of the things he pointed out was that the southwestern portion of the ADIZ, which is the part around Pratas, has seen some of the highest increase of Chinese sorties.
So, I mean, my strong view is that our interest is in defending the main island of Taiwan and its kind of core territory, and we cannot afford to be drawn into a sort of losing battle over peripheral territory. I mean, this is obviously the Quemoy and Matsu issue from before, and but that was a different era when the military balance was different in the Strait itself. I think our ability to or our willingness to go to the mat over kind of peripheral territory is limited. It doesn't mean that we would just look the other way, but Taiwan is already difficult enough to defend, the main island, Formosa or whatever. So that should really be our focus. And I think Taipei should be cautious about, and I haven't seen them do anything irresponsible, but I think they should be cautious about precipitating any kind of controversy over the peripheral territories.
Bonnie?
Yeah, I would just add briefly that I think that we should all make China aware of the cost of trying to use force to seize an already occupied feature, as well as unoccupied features. And that's something I think we haven't seen since, if I'm correct, 1988. And this would send an incredibly negative signal to all of the other claimants that what I said earlier, that China really does have the ambition to take every one of those land features eventually. And so maybe there are ways we can signal that to Beijing, because they certainly should be strongly discouraged. And I would caution against an official US position that reflects what Bridge Colby has just said, because that could encourage China to go in there and take it, because we care about Taiwan Island, but the other islands are peripheral and they're not in US interests. That's not to say that I think that, helping, that we should get our US Navy out there to help them defend protests. Taiwan has very limited capability to defend those islands. They're not very close to Taiwan. But I do think we should caution China, and they need to understand that the cost, this is not just a China-Taiwan issue. This is a much broader issue. The issue of using force to change the status quo and to seize a feature that has been occupied for so long by another claimant would redound very negatively to Chinese interests.
Yeah, if I could just, Greg, quick, I mean, I actually think that, and others know more about this than I do, but I mean, I think, China did seize the Yejiang Islands, I guess in the first Taiwan Straits crisis, or maybe a couple of years before, and Taipei and Washington decided to let it go. I mean, in a way, I think probably Beijing understands, and it's important others in the region understand that our real commitment is to the main island and the main features. In a way, that probably the reason China hasn't seized them is because it would actually backfire on China for precisely the reasons that Bonnie is, I think, laying out, which is that they are, like Quemoy and Matsu, they are effectively indefensible. But if China uses military force over indefensible features, what does that say about the future of if and when China does achieve predominance? It's a little bit of an analog to the reason why I think I'm most worried about Taiwan and the Philippines. I do worry about Vietnam, but in terms of PRC use of force. But you see what happened in NATO after Russia used force against Ukraine, which is the best thing that happened to the NATO alliance, in decades, by demonstrating its utility. And frankly, a similar thing happened in 1950, which drove countries towards alliance with the US. So China's interest, is not in demonstrating the utility of of associating with the Americans, and beating up on the weak part or the weak kids is a self-defeating strategy. But that's why I think Taiwan again is such an important part.
Thanks, Bridge. I mean, so to Bonnie's point, I guess it's not a perfect parallel, but the closest I can think of is spring 2016, when reportedly President Obama and President Xi, during their meeting on the Silent Nuclear Security Summit, President Obama informed him that a permanent occupation of Scarborough would precipitate a unspecified crisis in the U.S.-China relationship. And there was no public signaling, there was no statement that the U.S. would, use force, or that the NPT would come into effect. And yet China reportedly turned around its barges and decided not to build on Scarborough. And so the implication that this will end up costing you more than it gains has at least worked from time to time.
Well, but the difference there is that China's advantage in the Scarborough is a lot less clear than an immediate offshore area. So, I mean, we got to think about the ultimate source of resolution of this would be a fight, and it matters who would prevail over that. So, that's an important distinction.
Well, we're a few minutes over. We've broken our normal rule, but this has been a great discussion. We're going to have to cut it off there. We didn't get through all the questions. If you want to follow up your questions, go ahead and send it to me, send it to Bonnie, send it to Bridge directly. We're going to keep talking about the South China Sea a lot more in future, I promise. So thank you for joining us, and everybody stay safe.